everyone. Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have someone on my screen today that makes me happy because she has 2 podcasts. And anytime we can have somebody with more than one, we got lots to talk about. I'm excited to have her on the podcast. The one show I've been listening to today is She Built This, and it's great. Great guests, great conversations, and you can tell that this podcaster knows what she's doing as a host. Emily's on the podcast. Emily, welcome to the How to Podcast series as my guest co-host. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. And thanks for listening to the show. I love that you checked it out.
See, of course. I love it. So I'm talking about She Built This, but you have more than one show. Tell us about both. Tell us about the little story behind them. And then we're going to get into our conversation.
It's podcasters and podcasts, and I know you can probably agree with this. They're like tattoos. Like once you get one, you just can't stop, right? So She Built This is my oldest child. It is 5.5 years old, and I had that one is an interview focused show. So it was actually started in a podcast studio, like right in my backyard. Not my actual backyard, but around the corner from me. And I would go in person and interview people. So my scope of who I could like actually interview was kind of small. It was limited to the state of New Hampshire for the most part. And then I realized, I could just do this from my house and A, wear my pajamas while I'm doing it, and B, talk to people all across the world. So I did that, and that's been a really great experience. It was last year, actually, that I sat down with a friend of mine who is a strategist, a podcast strategist. And I was like, tell me what to do with my show. It needs to change. It's not doing anything for my business because it's all interviews, and it was primarily shining a light on their expertise. So I didn't really align it to my business whatsoever. Like what my area of expertise was. Not that you need to, but that was for me something that I felt was missing and like what I was able to express and share. So she's like, well, why don't you just start another one? And it could be about content and about marketing and about visibility. I'm like, no. Like, you're nuts. You're crazy. And you know what? Once she said it, I couldn't get it out of my head. And it was like, I was home alone during a weekend. We had like 40 inches of snow. No joke. And I'm out there at like 7 o'clock in the morning shoveling the snow by myself. And I was thinking, hard work builds character, Emily. Hard work builds character. And it was like that the name popped into my head. I'm like, content with character. So nice. Now I have 2.
Well, that's amazing. So that content with character, I'm going to be binging tonight at work. So I have to go to my night job tonight. And I get to listen to podcasts all night while I'm at work. Fun. So you're going to get 8 hours of listens out of this guy tonight. So There you go. So I'm going to fly through your episodes and give you all the ratings and reviews and do all that to support you. But I'm listening up here in Canada, so that's good.
All right. You'll be a content pro by the end of that then. and that's another thing. And I want to talk to you about this actually. On that show, I was just talking about this with a website designer. I give all of the information I have. Like, I don't hold back in like giving you my, I'm not like, the secret sauce is behind the paywall. It's like, I want to give people as many tools and resources as I possibly can and share as much information with them to empower them to be able to take action on their own. So the result is actually that a lot of people listen and they're like, that sounds a little overwhelming for me and I would like help with this. Or my client isn't listening at all, and it's actually just really, really helping people that need it and can't afford to take action or to pay somebody to help them,
Yeah. I think it builds a community bridge between you and the listener. And after listening to X number of episodes, you just show up as a listener to you as the host with a credit card in hand going, I've been listening to your show. I'm learning a lot, but now I have questions. I want to go deeper. I want to go to the next level with you and hire you, and you can be my coach or you can be my guide because I already have learned so much from you. I feel like I owe you as a listener. I want to give back value to you by working with you. So it's a great way to have that warm lead without really having to work that hard to go out there and send emails and create funnels and do all these great things you can do. But having a personal connection with you as a listener, I already know so much about you by the value you give me, I'm ready to work with you just by listening to your show. And I think that's something we kind of forget about, is that the people are really like, it's an intimate experience to listen to a podcast. And it's exciting when that turns into a relationship that could lead to, supporting you financially and helping your business grow, all from just doing a podcast. I think more people should do it.
Yeah, or just being a connection or a friend or part of your community. Like, I mean, that is truly why I do it. Why I do everything I do, I think, in my business. And like, the fact that it pays the bills is just a bonus.
It's good. I love it. So for your podcast, do you have problems juggling two different shows? I know that She Built This is kind of changing a little bit of its how often you produce episodes, but how do you balance the two? For someone listening, they're like, "Oh, I never thought of having two shows." How do you kind of balance the two? What are your little tips?
Well, at first, I'll be honest and say it was not easy because I was still keeping She Built This at once a week. And then I moved that down to every other week. And then I still realized it was a little bit more than I had capacity for, because I also do other speaking engagements. I like to guest on other people's shows. Like, that's one of my favorite things. I didn't want to give that up. And I have clients. So it's like, something's got to give. So I moved She Built This to a once a month basis, which feels really, really good. And like, as I sit here right now, I'm set through the month of July. And that feels amazing. Like, we're here on May 15th. And I'm like, okay, I get to sit back and not worry about that until July. Content with character, it's so much easier for me to do a solo show. I don't have to, like with a guest, I come really, really prepared. Sometimes I read the book of my guest and like, then I know everything that they've put in their book and I can ask them deeper questions. And like, I like to really come prepared for my guests. So I was putting a lot of time in that, not to mention like with a guest, there tends to be, not always, but there tends to be like a little bit more editing that's going to be needed. So it really did save me a lot of time reducing that to one time a month. And then, like I said, like my content with character, I mean, I just kind of give myself an outline, couple notes, sit in front of the microphone and bada bing, bada boom. Yeah.
It's nice that you have the balance between the two. I think when we do one over the other and we never try an interview or we never try a solo episode, we don't know what we don't know. We might be missing an opportunity. And like you said, when you do interviews all the time, your audience is just hearing you put a spotlight on someone else, which is good. You get to build your community. You get to build your network by having all these great people come on. That's awesome. But sometimes the audience just wants to hear from you. They want some one-on-one time with you as the host and know more about you. Like, what makes you tick? And like, why are you doing this show? And what do you offer in the world? I really want to know more about you. And they get curious. So anytime you can step away from the guesting part and do something solo episode, it's a great opportunity. One thing I helped one person with their show is they couldn't do a weekly episode, an interview every week. So I suggested to them to do every other week. And then on the in-between weeks, when you didn't have an interview, do a recap episode about what happened last week.
I love that.
So last week, Emily was on the show. This is what we talked about. I've been thinking about it, and here's my thoughts as to what Emily and I talked about. Here are some of the things that I would like to talk to you about based on our conversation. Oh, and if you haven't heard that episode, go back one episode and you'll hear my time with Emily and hear where the context of this recap episode came from. The beauty is you can record the recap episode right after you finish recording the interview while it's fresh in your mind. So you do a 30-minute interview, your guest leaves, and you just stay set up, record the extra episode right now. And you're done.
I love that. It's like the fact checking on Dax Shepard's episode at the end with him and Monica. Yeah. I mean, that's the best part of the show.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So you get to do it all in one shot, which gives you some freedom in your calendar to do other things.
Yep.
Without feeling like the grind of having to do an episode every week. And it doesn't have to be 45 minutes. It could be a 5-minute episode.
Right.
Here's my recap from last week. Here's some thoughts. Here's some things, some takeaways that I'm working on, what I learned from my time with Emily.
Yeah, you make a good point. We put a lot of rules in place around like this is one that gets me a lot is like people say, that they don't like the word consistency because it feels like too much pressure for them, or like, what if I'm not feeling? So to that, I say choose a frequency that you can be consistent with, which is why going back to like once a month is a consistency. Like it's not the frequency I had before where I was being consistent with a weekly one, but now I've dropped that down and now I'm able to be consistent. So I say choose, like you're allowed to bend the rules, there are no rules really. So go for it. But yeah, choosing a structure that works for you and works with the rest of your life and works with your business is exactly what we need to be encouraging people to do more of. There's no one size fits all for podcasting for sure, and not really for anything else.
Yeah. Is there anything else in the podcasting space where you hear a popular opinion and go, that doesn't really work for me in my podcast or how I do podcasting? And I'm like, I don't really buy into that belief in podcasting because it just doesn't work for me. So anything that you hear that you're like, no, not for me, not my show.
Well, there's definitely some things in the pitching world that grind my gears, but we don't have enough time for that. No, I think for me, showing up to a podcast, whether I'm the host or whether I'm the guest, it is not just another date in my calendar. It is something like I have some of my very best friends that I met all through podcasting. And that's not something to take lightly. Like it is truly life-changing. It's not just life-changing for the person I'm connecting with. It's also life-changing for the person. I cannot even tell you how much my life has changed since listening to podcasts. Like I have access to information I never would have gotten, and I have heard things like even the tiniest little snippet that has changed my life. So I think we need to remember that with podcasting. Like you have a lot of power and potential in what you're doing, both with the person you're connecting with and also with the ability to like find and express your voice. Like that's no small thing. And then you also get that chance to impact the person on the other side. So to that point, that's just why I think that a lot of people that I've had as guests, I can often tell when somebody is just in it for I'm just trying to promote my book, or I'm just trying to go on this thing to get my opt-in more email addresses. And that is not really the MO I ever have adopted, nor probably ever will.
Yeah. Yeah. When I hear people talk about the fact that you have to make money in your podcast or you're not successful, you have to have 1,000 true fans or you're not successful, you have to do all these have-tos. I've had people come on to meet with me and they're like, Dave, I would start a podcast, but my topic won't allow me to do video. And because I can't do video, I can't podcast. And I'm like, wait a minute. They're like, well, it's a very sensitive topic. I'm talking to people that have had traumatic events in their life and they don't want to be on camera. And I also, as someone survived a very traumatic event, I can't be on camera because what I talk about, I need to remain anonymous. I can't do video. So that means I can't be a podcaster. And I'm thinking, who made it mandatory? It's great if you can do a video podcast. Awesome. But it's not like you have to meet this criteria to be a podcaster. You can just do audio. It's fine. And they look at them as like, you mean I can just do audio? Yeah. And then I listen to a true crime podcast. And I'm thinking, if we have to do video on our podcasts, does that mean a true crime audio podcast has to make a movie?
Yeah.
Is that the mandatory? You have to make this a video? Well, it's just a bunch of actors and voice actors and things and a script. You're telling me we have to make a movie. That's like telling an author, if you write a book, you have to make a movie. No, I don't. I can just be an author.
I'm all about like repurposing when we can, but I'm also not into making content for content's sake. And if there's a platform or a way of producing content that I really don't like I don't really love video. I don't. I've tried it many times and I'm like, I don't love it. I'm just not going to force myself to do that because it's going to be like, it comes through when I'm trying to sit there and record a video. I'm like, hello. So yeah. So I'm with you. Like I just don't think we hear these things once and then we think it's like the end all be all.
Yeah. I just want to remove some of that fear that you have to do it this way or you can't participate. I think podcasting is meant for everyone. From the day one when it first came out years ago, it was designed for everyone could have a voice. And you didn't have this sign that said you had to be this tall to get on the ride. None of that stuff you'd see at an amusement park. I just see people putting up signs in podcasting say, if you don't do it this way, Emily, you're not doing it right. So that means you can't do it. And I'm just like, I like to run around and tear the signs down. That's what my job is. I just want to rip them down. And I want everybody who wants to get on the microphone, whether you do one podcast episode a year or you do one a day, doesn't matter. You have a story to tell and your voice matters. And the more people who can come to this, the better, because you're going to reach people that I can't. I can't do your show. There's no way I can do your podcast. It's you. It's all you. And we need more people who understand that even though there's thousands of podcasts out there, your podcast isn't out there yet, and we need your voice. So that's why I created the show, because I wanted people like you to come on and encourage them to share their story and get out there and have the support of a community of people who are believing in you and pushing you forward towards something great just by listening to our conversation.
Yeah. And I do think that it is a community. You and I are in a community specifically for finding and being guests in podcasts. And it's a free, there's a free level and there's also a paid level. But once you start connecting with people in there, you realize just how supportive the podcast community is and how we all like build these like side relations. Like there's a lot happening in the podcast community, and podcasters tend to know other podcasters and tend to be friends with other podcasters and tend to want other people to become podcasters. So it really is I think it is a very supportive community for exactly the reasons you said, that we believe that everybody should have that voice, Yeah. That wants
I like connecting with a guest and doing my homework as a podcaster. You talked about reading the book of your guest, listening to their show, whatever it is, to connect with them before you have them on. I'm listening to your show. I had a guest on yesterday for the How to Podcast series, and I've been listening to their podcast. And in one of their episodes, they kind of made this off comment around, oh, well, my favorite number is 22. And then they went on to talk about something else. It was just kind of like they inserted that into the episode just to mention my favorite number is 22. Well, as a listener of their show, I heard them say that. My favorite number is 22. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I want to know more. I had them come on my podcast. And in the introduction, I'm like, so I'll pretend it's you. I'm like, hey, everybody, Emily's here. She's got a book. She's got a podcast. And her and I have something in common. We both love the number 22. And the guests sat up, turned their head slightly, looked into the camera like they're looking into my soul. And they're like, how did you know that? What? I totally caught them off guard. Because I pulled out from them their favorite number. And then we went into the talk, we're chatting and stuff. And then we came back like 3/4 of the way through. I'm like, let's go back to the 22 thing. I said, I mentioned in the intro that your favorite number is 22. Mine is. I'm like, tell me the story. Why 22? I was like, I have my own story, but I'd like to hear yours. And the look on her face was just like, who are you? Like, I totally threw her off because she was not anticipating that at all. But there was this great story behind the 22. And then I got to share mine. And we had this moment where it wasn't just a canned interview like we've done 100 times, but there was this moment where we connected as host and guest. And I love doing that stuff. Have you had a chance, either as a guest or as the host, to connect with your guest in a special way? I'd love to hear kind of your story on that too.
Let's think about that. You're so good at giving like a really tangible, specific example. I'll tell you what I do. Okay. I'll give you a specific example of what I do. And I'm sure it relates to my guests. I just can't pull up a specific off the top of my head. I like to mention a listener in my show. And when sometimes it's like a inside joke I might have with a listener. Sometimes it's a listener that's super, super supportive of me and like has said something about something they like about the podcast. Today on the She Built This episode that came out, I mentioned my friend Christina, and she had no idea that was coming. And she's like, oh my God, I feel like a celebrity. She's like, that is so crazy. I like to give a listener a specific like shout out. I definitely have done it with guests. I'm just not able to like conjure up the specific example off the top of my head.
I like to throw in little things like a word of the day or word of the episode at the end of the episode and just see who bites.
Yeah.
I'm like, so at the end of the episode today, the word of the day is character. And if you hear it this part in the podcast, thank you for listening to this part. That's great. You're listening to the end. Respond in an email, voicemail, whatever. Just the word character. That tells me you've listened to this episode. And I just want to say thank you for listening this far. And then I get all these emails that don't come in, not just like in the first few days, but like a year later, you get an email that says character. And you're like, oh,
that's so fun.
Amazing. Because now people are like interacting with you and then you can mention them. Like Silly Mom 32 says character. Thank you, Silly Mom 32. That's amazing. And they know who they are. And they're like, they mentioned me. Another little trick that I do is I look at my stats and I look at my last 5 episodes and I look for a new listener in a part of the world that I've never seen before. So maybe it's like I've never had anybody in Ohio who's ever listened to my show. And all of a sudden, the last 5 episodes, there's someone in Columbus that's been listening. That's one person. I'm pretty sure it's the same person, but they just showed up in the last 5 episodes. So what I do is I go, hey, I just want to point out that we have a new listener in Columbus, Ohio. I see you're listening. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to the show. And then off we go, just to the next thing. And it's like that person sits up and goes, maybe they're talking about me. I'm a new listener. I'm in Columbus. Okay, they know I'm listening. And it's that little engagement piece that makes people go, I'm seen. Like this podcaster, I don't understand podcasting, but this podcaster just called me out and gave me some kind of they said something about me. I feel so special. Like, talk about winning over a listener and turning them into a fan, right? I love doing that. I love that you do it the same thing. That's great.
Yeah, I think that was a brilliant idea. You also gave me an idea from our last conversation about adding in that voicemail feature. So I am trying that, and Buzzsprout, if you're on that platform for hosting your podcast, they just added a fan mail feature so people can send you so people can text you, which I think is super fun. So I'm going to experiment with those similar to, and then I want to be able to, engage with people when they send things in and actually include them in the episodes as well. And I think that I listened to a show. It is not about on business. It's called The Nice Guys on Business. They do have a Monday episode that is like specific to an entrepreneur or a business owner, but then they have a Friday episode, and that's the one I like. I'm not going to say the word because it is a curse word, but it is just a Friday episode where they just have fun. Okay. And you can call in as a listener and leave a voicemail, and like, the show is great, just them. But then they get to the voicemail part and they start playing the voicemails, and all of us listeners talk to each other because we are responding to other voicemails that the other person left last week. I mean, It's so fun and brilliant. So I did start doing that because I was like, oh, this is a really fun way to engage with people. And then I love that texting feature for the person that is maybe a little bit more shy or doesn't want their voice to be out there, so I like that too. So yeah,
Smart.
I think the more touch points, the better.
That's great. Yeah, the more touch points, the better. Buzzsprout, that's a great idea from Buzzsprout.
Yeah.
I saw that too. I have one of my shows on Buzzsprout, and I turned that on right away. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to get that. It's great. It's amazing. So how else are you staying motivated to keep podcasting? What are the things that bring you back to the microphone? I'd love to kind of get that sense too.
I will put it all out there. With my content with character podcast, I literally never run out of ideas. I never run out of motivation. I have a list that is 135 ideas deep right now, and I'm adding to it every single. I mean, I just added one yesterday. I was like, oh my God, I need to stop going. Like, when am I going to fit all these? Because that's just how my brain works with that. With She Built This, I am in a little bit of a weird transition point. So the podcast has been going on for 5 years, and like, not to get into the whole backstory, but it was a whole business in and of itself. Like, it was actually a second business that I had. It was a membership community with like a kind of like referral network, and it was a big thing. It was a big, big thing. And I've slowly been closing down pieces of it. So now, where I sit with my podcast, I'm not really sure that the way I do the interviews, the way I do the show is how I want to keep moving. What I love, and what you and I are doing right now, is like a little bit more of just like this co-hosted experience, where you just kind of show up and you have a conversation, and I'm not the one sitting there like grilling them, basically. So I've come up with a few like iterations of that. And what is important to me is that I'm not just creating content for content's sake. Like, I want to create something that people actually really do want to listen to and really, really engage in. So I have time, right? Like, I've got episodes in the can until July. So like, I have the time to make the decision, and I don't know what it looks like. I don't know if it's pivoting it and like turning it into a different name with a different look and a different feel. I don't know if it's sundowning it. I think that's what they call it. I don't know. Yeah. and then starting a new one. Like, I don't know. So that's kind of how it's evolved. And I pay very, very close attention to like what lights me up and what doesn't. And I'm not really into, at this point in my life, because I've done this my whole life, pushing myself when I'm just not interested in doing something. Like, that's not fun. Like, I want it to be, effective, but I'm also not going to force myself to do something that is just like absolutely painful, because I don't need to. Like the things that bring me joy are also effective for me. So that's kind of where I like to focus my time and energy. And yeah, the feeling of it just sort of shifted for me, and it's been a long, slow process, but that's where I'm at right now. So,
have you heard from your audience during that change from weekly to every second week to once a month?
Well, I've watched
feedback from your audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think a stat shows you a lot of information, right? So the stats have definitely given me some feedback that people are definitely not in it like they were before, which is interesting. I went to go get my haircut yesterday, and I walked into my salon, and a woman like knew me from my podcast. Like, I've never seen her in my life, and she knew me she's like, I listen all the time. I look forward to when a new episode comes out. So that was interesting. But as far as like the actual, like, now I can see like, okay, these are the tried and true folks that I'm now speaking to. So, I probably need to put some sort of poll out there or call to contribute your ideas. But it's also interesting because like with that business, I've been a little more reserved in sharing my true feelings. Whereas like with my other business, I'll just tell people, I'll be like, this is what I'm doing. Sorry or not sorry. But with that, I always have been a little bit more reserved in sharing, because I don't know why.
It's interesting. Yeah. When people come and start a show, it's like, am I going to be podcasting this podcast for the rest of my life? Sometimes you can just have like a beginning, middle, and end. Mm-hmm. I've helped somebody and they have a 12 episode podcast, and that's it. Mm-hmm. It's like a chapters in books. The book doesn't go forever. It does have an end. And then you finish the book and put it on the shelf and move on to the next thing. Podcasts can be like that. You're not signing up to do this thing for the rest of your life beyond your passion for it, and you're just showing up to do the thing. Sometimes it comes to a natural close, and you're a different person than you were when you started the show. Your audiences are different. You've given value. People have received that value. You've helped many people with the show. I don't see it as a bad thing. If you're splitting your time between two things and you're not doing either well because you're bouncing back and forth between the two, trying to keep them both going. It's kind of like those plates that spin on a post. You know, you spin them and spin them and spin them, and then you move to the next one, spin that plate, and the other one starts to wobble because you're not giving it attention. Just whatever your heart leads you to, and your audience will follow. They love you. They love what you do. So, you know, your true fans will be there for you.
Yeah. Good reminder. I think often and I would imagine some people listening feel this way too. I think we often think that people don't think the best of us, right? We're like, oh, they're going to be mad at me or they don't like me and I have to work to get them to like me. So I think resting in that comfort, like for anybody listening that is struggling with that, like just resting in the comfort that the numbers you see, those are people that love you and like you and want to be in your world. You know, that is accurate information showing you that. So I think that's a comforting place rather than thinking like everybody's like against you or out to get you. So
yeah, you're the people that stick to the end of every episode, the people that respond to your emails or follow you on social or interact with you in any way. Those are the true people who will follow you no matter what path you take, even if they're not really as interested in the topic. They just love listening to your voice and they find comfort in that. I actually had somebody reach out to me for one of my podcasts and they said, I got to be honest, I'm not really listening for the content. You just keep me company.
Aww.
And I'm like, you're not even, I'm like, wait, hang on. I'm putting a lot of work into this podcast. They're like, yeah, no, it's great. It's really good. But I'm not really getting that side of it. I'm getting more of the fact that you're part of my week now. Like, I look forward to hearing your voice.
See, that goes back to my point earlier about like how much power podcasting has for people. I mean, it is part of I could tell you exactly where I'm listening to every single podcast that comes out. I look forward to Wednesdays because this lady's podcast comes out that's like specific for my Enneagram type. And I'm like, ooh, what's she going to talk about this week? And then I take it on my walk with me, you know? So it's part of people's lives. And I think we need to remember that. So.
What else can we do as podcasters to support our fellow podcasters? You're mentioning that you have certain podcasts you listen to. I think maybe from my perspective, just kind of set up my question, I think we can do better to our fellow podcasters. We know what it feels like to get responses, but we don't tend to respond as a listener to other podcasters. Like, they just know, right? Just like, They know that we love their stuff, but we've never, as podcasters who seek to get engagement, have never really given engagement to our fellow podcasters. And I'm like, I really want to do more of that.
Yeah, maybe that's where you and I differ a little. I really do. Actually just yesterday, and I think this is an easy way to do it. So here's a great idea. Just yesterday, I listened to this woman's podcast. I heard her on a friend's podcast. So my friend Melissa Snow has the Powerful Women Rising podcast. Melissa was just a guest on my podcast. So anyway, I love Melissa's show. She does a great job. She always has great guests. She's very authentic. So I hear this woman on her show, and I don't remember this woman's name. So now I feel a little bad about it. Like I'm not going to be able to give her a shout out, but it's Anna something. Okay. So I hear her on Melissa's show. And I was like, oh my God, I love her. So then I go find her show. I download 4 or 5 of them, listen to all those. And then I went over to Instagram and left her this goes a long way. I left her a little voice memo saying what I loved about her episodes, saying how I loved listening to her on Melissa Snow. And then we connected on that. Like we went back and forth for like a long time, connecting back and forth on each other's podcasts. So that's one thing you can do. And then I love also, like, as a podcaster, if you hear something, this is plagiarism and copycatting is so huge for me and I will not do it. So if you hear something and it's like a very good concept or a very good idea and you heard it on somebody else's podcast, it takes you 2 seconds to shout out their podcast where you first heard it. You know, I first got this idea from my dear friend so-and-so, or I first got this idea from this random podcast that I listen to, you know, like giving back in that way, I think is something they may never even know, but it goes a really, really long way for you building your own like reputability and like trustworthiness, but also goes a long way for like building up other podcasters, you know? And then, you know, there's the standard stuff like reviewing and commenting on people. I do give my friends a lot of, I'm like, oh my God, amazing episode today, Alicia. Amazing episode today, Lisa. But I also am like very close friends with people I listen to. So that's, you know, that has an extra dynamic to it.
Good. So if you're listening and you do that, just like Emily does, great. Do more of that. Do it often. And if you're like my comment, maybe you don't do it enough, then please start. Because reaching out to people like that as a fellow podcaster, you know how hard it is to do this thing on a regular basis. So any type of feedback that you can give, any kind of support to a fellow podcaster goes a long way. So please do that.
I got two more for you.
Good.
One is if you have a great guest on your show, it's really easy to just be like, hey, I'm going to introduce you to so-and-so because that you would be a great guest on their show too. That's awesome. I do that often. I shouldn't say all the time, but often. And the next one is you can even do like your top 10 favorite podcast as a post. Like let's say you do like a carousel post, right? And you just do like a swipe through of the 10 podcasts that are in your queue right now. That's awesome. And then you can individually tag those podcasters, and people who listen to podcasts tend to enjoy listening to other podcasts. So that's another way to like get people that are podcast fans to find out what's in your ear because they probably want it in their ear too. So, and a super easy way to give back.
I love it. And now I know you have a walk coming up with a dog and a good friend. So before we wrap up our episode, I'd just love to throw it back to you. Give us some words of wisdom beyond what we've already covered today for that new podcaster that's out there on the journey of starting and growing a show. Any kind of words of wisdom from you? I'd love to close off with your thoughts.
Okay, here's my thoughts. You don't build confidence by sitting around and waiting for it to strike. Okay, so I think that and same with inspiration and also with motivation. Like if I'm just sitting there waiting to feel inspired or waiting until I'm motivated or waiting until I feel confident, I'm going to be waiting a very long time. The way it so often happens, I think, is just taking like the very smallest step and doing it again and again and again and again. And then you start to build courage, which in my opinion, then you start to build confidence, like with that courage that got you started. And that is how you get to look back and be like, oh my gosh, I'm very good at this thing. And I'm so inspired by it. I'm so motivated to keep on doing it. So I think that's my reminder for us all is like, we can't sit around and wait for the confidence to do the thing. It's not really ever gonna strike.
Wise words. I love that, Emily. Before you go to your walk, which is pending in a few moments, your website, your contact information, and maybe for a new listener coming to your podcast, where should they start listening? Give us some directions on what the first episode should be that we listen to of your show.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share that. So I think you should start listening to 4 questions to ask yourself before you take on a new project. Because if you are thinking about starting a podcast or a blog or a video podcast, anything like that, these 4 questions will help you to determine whether or not you have the time, space, excitement, capacity, all of that jazz. People love that episode. It's like my number 1 most downloaded episode. So that's on content with character. And if you're listening to Dave's podcast right now, you can probably just use your podcast player, search content with character. I am the only podcast with that name. So just look for the face. I don't know how to describe. Look for the brown hair and you'll find it. And my website is emilyaborn.com, which is acorn with a B.
I love it. It's great. Okay, so everyone, all the information, including a link to that episode to go and listen to Emily's show about those 4 items, they're all going to be included in the show notes as always. So Emily, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you being here. Go enjoy your walk with your friend and the dog. And, we're looking forward to the next episode of your podcast. So keep going.
Already can't wait. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thanks for being here on the How to Podcast series. Glad to have you on the show with us, listening in. And hope they're finding value in the podcast. I hope you're finding something that helps you with your show. helps you with the tools and the information from these amazing guest co-hosts through our daily Daves and these solo episodes. The variety of what we're doing here on the podcast is all designed for you so that you can get the tools you need to create your podcast and keep going with your show. That's why we're here. That's why I'm doing this. And I'm glad you're here finding value in this. If you would like to do a little bit more than just be a listener, if you want to do community with podcasters, we have a thing called our Meetup on meetup.com. You can come find us, and there'll be a link on our website at howtopodcast.ca, and you can come and join in on our Meetup. Instead of just being a listener, you could actually participate and come in and join other podcasters, just like you, at your stage, at your level, where you're at right now. And then other podcasters who are maybe a little further down the road, who can learn from you and you can learn from them. And we host these meetups on a regular basis. Again, go to howtopodcast.ca and you'll find all the information there. We'd love for you to come join us at our next meetup. The only thing we need at our next meetup is you. You're the only thing missing from all of this. So consider joining our meetups. Again, they're totally free on a regular basis, all through howtopodcast.ca. And I'd love to hear more from you about your podcast as well. There's a SpeakPipe link on howtopodcast.ca. Leave a message. I'd love to hear about you and your show and how we can work together to get your message into the world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for sharing the show with another podcaster that you're like, hey, I think you'd really like this episode. Go ahead, share the episode, and let's get more podcasters on the mic. Thanks for listening.